Presenting now is Seyi Ajibade from the University of Pittsburgh, USA. Seyi is a scholar musician pursuing a PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Pittsburgh, USA. He holds a master's degree in education and piano performance from Carthage College in Wisconsin, as well as a bachelor's degree from the University of Lagos in Nigeria. As a pianist, he has received 2 awards for excellence in solo piano competitions. As a scholar, he is a respected member of the Society for Ethnomusicology, SEM, the Lagos Studies Association, and the Canadian Association of African Studies, where he has presented his research findings. Seyi primarily engages in activities and discourses that address social, cultural, and political issues, with a specific focus on art music within Africa and the diaspora. His dedication to community building, music, and social involvement has driven him to volunteer with non-profit organizations, including Àkójọpọ. He is also the founder and executive director of the Chamber Music Society of Nigeria to express music, culture, and community development. Please welcome Seyi Ajibade to present Sounding Home: Migration, Space, Reclamation, and Creative Mediation in African Art Music.
Thank you. I'll just go on to the presentation. So my presentation, like the presenter said, Sounding Home, Migration, Space Reclamation, and Creative Mediation in African Art Music. In the African post-colony, the idea of African art music served as a medium for African composers and musicians to express their cultural identity within the European classical music paradigm. Through this practice, early Nigerian or African musicians such as Sam Akpabot, T.K. Phillips, Ayoba Nkole, Ephraim Amo, and Michael Morin, who migrated and interacted with external influences, shaped the music scene, where their migration experiences also influenced their music. African art music in the 21st century continues to undergo new transformations musically, systematically, and operationally. That is, in terms of its sonic sensibilities, sonic preferences, and practices. One of the recent significant impacts that piques my interest, which this presentation is based on, is the diasporic contribution of African migrant musicians who have either migrated for educational purposes, for greener pastures, or who identify as second-generation immigrants. These groups vary in different ways, some of which have acquired musical trainings through the Western music lens in diaspora, with or without any understanding of what African art music means. While some are home-trained musicians, my use of home here refers to Africa. These are gaps that are covered in this presentation. The remaining part of the narrative that propagates African art music through their conscious or unconscious contributions. These groups of musicians, of which I share a part of their story, have been represented or supported by significant art organizations, including the Chineke Orchestra in the UK, Finch Organization in the US, Àkójọpọ in Nigeria and the US, and the African Concert Series Program Performing Arts Group in the UK. Through this, you can see the geography I am working with. From this list, I used 2 main organizations to make my argument: the African Art Music Series in the United Kingdom and Àkójọpọ, or you can say Àkójọpọ Music Foundation in the US. I ask, how do these migrant musicians comprising of performers and composers through these organizations practice art music in the lands shaped by their very colonial legacies that once disrupted their musical traditions? How do these organizations reclaim spaces and practice cultural mediation? Migration from Africa to Europe or America is not just movement of people. It is a migration of sound, memory, and cultural agency. For African art music, which integrates indigenous African expressions with European musical practices, the question of belonging becomes both geographical and musical. This question is also a fact that is evident in the identity of an African musician practicing African art music. As migration is not the problem here, in fact, migration shapes identity into new realities. Although the migrant or immigrant is usually first unaware of their dual identity as they adapt to new reality, as Frantz Fanon responds critically to migration and its effect, arguing that after a migrant assimilates, they become the native intellectual and sometimes realize that taking on European attributes has transformed them into strangers in their own land upon return. It states three phases of native intellectual. First is the assimilation phase, where the colonized identify with the colonizer's culture, practices, and may even distance themselves from their own culture. The second phase is the awakening phase, in which the intellectual practices a crisis of conscience, realizing the erasure of their own culture. And lastly is the revolutionary phase. This is the part I like, in which the intellectual becomes an active participant in the liberation of their people. By reinterpreting the past and dialogue with the present, they begin to use their trainings and access to challenge cultural domination and creating new forms of hybrid expression. So drawing on Fanon's theory of the native intellectual, African migrant musicians who train in the West and re-engage with their musical heritage exemplifies a transformative journey from cultural assimilation to creative resistance, using African art music as a medium for identity negotiation, diasporic belonging, and post-colonial expression. Through composition and performance, they create a sense of cultural resistance as a part of contribution to Pan-African or decolonial aesthetics. And more importantly, they create global space for African arts music to thrive. According to Kofi Asante and Ulrich Campbell, both professors of African music studies, African American music studies, explains Pan-Africanism as a cultural and political movement that aims to unite, is a cultural and political movement that aims to unite African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora, by affirming their historical agency and collective identity rooted in the African values, while responding to centuries of colonial and imperial dominance. This movement has significantly influenced their goals and practices of African art music as a cultural and artistic movement towards a musical reclamation that reshapes the perception of the African identity within art music discourse. Musicians practicing African art music actively reclaims agency and contribute to the narrative of African artistic Pan-Africanism by performing work deeply rooted in African traditions and showcasing the dynamic of African aesthetics in formal artistic settings. According to John Henrik Clark, it says, Pan-Africanism, paraphrase though, Pan-Africanism, often thought as a movement conceived and developed by Africans living outside Africa, was in fact a worldwide movement affecting Africans in every part of the world. Clark's assertion helps us to understand Pan-Africanism beyond mere geographical movement, but as a collective consciousness sharing similar interests. African art music reveals how performances, spaces, and musical practice draw attention to global histories and dialogues in which African music is deeply interconnected. This shows how art music ideas acquire meaning beyond Africa. Through processes of interpretation, transmission, and cultural adaptation, African art music functions as a mediation force, allowing diasporic Africans to articulate their own belonging wherever they are, negotiate their identity, and sonically reconstruct notions of home in transnational contexts. Africans and African diasporic scholars such as Robert Nell and Tiesha Mados said, I've discussed how migration has been used to reclaim spaces and create a form of psychological freedom. through organizational support, where a sense of collectiveness and political assertion are debated within the migrant bodies, African art, music, and trend. I argue that these organizations serve not only as platform for performance and composition, but also as cultural mediators, facilitating artistic exchange, supporting transnational collaboration, and providing African migrant musicians with spaces to reclaim agencies, said that a lot of times, and construct a sense of home for African migrant communities, including musicians and non-musicians, and I will explain why. Then I move to the first case study that I have here, is Àkójọpọ. Àkójọpọ is a non-profit organization in the United States and Nigeria that seeks to promote and integrate, this is from their website, promote and integrate Pan-African art music globally, celebrating its cultural richness and significance across diverse communities and diaspora, through concerts, e-commerce, marketplace, and art administration initiatives. We, because I also belong to this society, we empower Pan-African art music communities and raise global awareness to celebrate the diverse heritage of African and Afro-diasporic music worldwide. Africans in the United States continue to receive educational and artistic service through Àkójọpọ, through their programs and initiatives. As a result of its Pan-African expression, Àkójọpọ therefore practice an apolitical approach towards Pan-Africanism, which is talking about approach without any political consciousness, or let's say it's not really about politics, it's about the arts. By hosting concerts in the United States and other parts of Africa in view, collaborating with African-based musicians through performing their compositions to a broader audience, working with African-based and African migrant musicians, and even collaborating with non-Western trained musicians, they create a sense of what Seyi Ajibade, professor of African Studies, said, refers to as home away from home. In return, these migrant audiences also support Àkójọpọ's project, actively contributing to shaping the social realities that challenge art music through their donation and engagement. It demonstrates how Àkójọpọ uses its platform to bring together Africans and African diasporic communities, thereby supporting Àkójọpọ's project. The next one is the African Concert Series. The African Concert Series was founded in 2019 by Rebecca Omodia, a Nigerian, Romanian, and British pianist in the United Kingdom. According to their website, paraphrased, the African Concert Series London is a platform for the music of hundreds of African classical composers by promoting diverse cultural education through music, and a place that redefines our perspectives of classical music. As an award-winning pianist herself, Omodia uses this platform as a means of reclaiming space and exploring creative dimensions, working with diverse groups of musicians of African descent and even non-African descent. The African Concert Series therefore allows me to say this, that it puts African art music at the forefront, at the face of the community through its frequent concert performances at major venues like the Wigmore Hall, which of course is influenced by Omodia's residency. So I call this last part a coda because I don't think I have a conclusion to this. Maybe it could be a conclusion, but I just say coda. This presentation may seem like a discourse in music which encompasses ethnomusicology, musicology, or as a presenter suggested yesterday, African musicology in quotes. Music is the central focus here, but extending beyond music or African art music, I invite us to critically engage this discussion within a broader scope, including African art studies and sociology, where the impact of African art music can create a strata in the discourse of social movement and social change, introducing concepts such as collective identity, affect, political opportunities, space, and mobilization. Employing a Pan-African ideology allows for musical and non-musical expressions within these spaces, as Carlton Hester claims that Pan-African processes create systems, styles, and fundamental processes that focus more on content than form, and reveal how observing related musical processes and pattern within a broader universe can be used to discover viable dynamic system. It also discusses the various musical processes involved in producing change or development. African art music, despite its integration with Western musical ideals, cannot be merely duplicated or universally replicated because it is deeply rooted in Pan-African consciousness that is shaped by cultural memory, artistic exploration of indigenous ideas, and pursuit of cultural determinants. Through my presentation, it is clear that the question of who plays African music has been answered. I mean, I didn't show us video, but I think now that I have more time, I probably would not show video, but okay, I can make a change. I can show us some, I won't play sound. This is the African concert series, for example. If you look at it very well, you can go to their website, you see the diverse group of musicians playing. They don't need to have any, it doesn't have to be African or whatsoever. It's completely diverse. And at Àkójọpọ's website, you can also go there and learn more about what these groups are doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Seyi. I think we have a few minutes. Oh, for questions. Okay, let's start from Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Seyi. It's just a general question. I don't think you'll be able to answer the question because you are not the one who wrote it there about what I think is a little tension between something being apolitical and yet it's Pan-Africanism. I think that ultimately, whether it's in the form of a cultural action or whatever, Pan-Africanism for me is political, you know. But the other question that you can then respond to the two is that what are you going to do with this research? You know, what's the ultimate goal about your interest in this? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The first question, so recently I kind of got interested in Pan-Africanism and Africana studies, and what I took out from that is that Pan-Africanism itself is a growing field. It's something that changes. The Pan-Africanism of Marcus Garvey and the Pan-Africanism of now, it's really different because different scholars, we now have things like literary Pan-Africanism, where people are writing about Maya Angelou's visits to Ghana and all of those writings about literatures, using literature to address Pan-Africanism. So I think those kind of Pan-Africanism fall into apolitical. Yeah, music, I mean, this is a question that I think has always been of concern. Is music political or not? It's a very big question. So I think music sometimes it's political, sometimes it's just music. So I think I would have cited the scholar who talked about apolitical Pan-Africanism. Yeah, but thank you for your contribution. The other question, what am I going to do with this research? Well, currently I'm looking at how different composers or different groups of different bodies are addressing Pan-Africanism, African art music, what they are doing with it. Last year, and 2 years ago, Àkójọpọ, we did a program where we commissioned composers of diverse groups. We put out a commissioning project and over 51 composers applied from all over the world, Asia, America, Africa, and yeah. And we commissioned 10 composers. And this commissioning project really tells us that people can dive into this idea or this concept, whatever we call it. And looking at these other groups that are not composers, what are they doing with African art music. I am interested in other aspects of African art music. I'm not a composer. I would rather be interested in the social aspect of African art music, and that's why I'm delving into this part of research. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay. We have 2 questions online. Okay, let's go online quickly for 2, then we'll come back. Please, let's make it briefly as we're trying to get, okay, where do we start from? Okay, let's start from Dr. Ajose. I don't know how, but let's start from Dr. Ajose, then we'll go to Dr. Konoji.
Yeah. Thank you, Ajibade, for your insightful presentation. I'm just wondering, like Professor Omoboye referenced, that it will be difficult for you to distance the effort of these migrant musicians as political or apolitical. So it's something that we want to push. And I'm wondering if your use of migrant musicians, there's this debate around who constitute, are you talking about those who have moved or those who were born there, or those, do these musicians even consider themselves as migrant musicians? So I think it's one aspect maybe you want to clarify. Lastly, do you think that the initiatives of these musicians, especially back home, can be considered as a form of cultural remittance? People talk about migration in the context of people sending dollars home, sending pounds home. But this initiative that these people do back home in Nigeria, for example, will you describe that as a kind of cultural remittance, remitting back something back home, but in this case, not in terms of money? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll start from the second question, maybe the first one, I don't know. But the question on how these musicians, the question on how, which group of musicians am I talking about? Yeah, at the beginning I mentioned the African musician, African-based, who migrated to Europe or America. Then second, migrant bodies, meaning people that were born by people who migrated before, and then they became, somehow they can decide to identify as African or decide to identify as American, but my presentation today focuses on musicians who actually practice African art music, and they are migrants by either by extension or direct migrants. Maybe they came from Africa. The Chineke Orchestra, for example, is filled with a lot of so-called black musicians, and they are not necessarily people who moved from maybe Nigeria to the UK. Some of them could identify as Africans, while some don't. And then we have the Finks Orchestra. If you check the list of the lady who won the violin concerto last year, her name is Chizoma or something, might not identify as Nigerian, even though maybe born to Igbo parents. But if these organizations are doing these things for the people who represent or who identifies as African descent, then some way they have formed a collective within that space for these migrants. So they are not necessarily, they don't have to carry, identity is not only by, oh, I am Nigerian, but I think it's by their consciousness and what they have formed within their space. That's what I think. Then the last question, which you asked about cultural remittance, I think it's very clear that some way it's a very good question, because some way the organizations, they give back to the society by the African base, they give back home by getting works from composers who are African based and performing those works in Europe, putting these works on bigger stage over there and making those works to be known. However, some of these organizations, their funding is probably from the US. And then it's like there is a little bit of tension there. That, okay, are you using the US grant to support African base? So I think it's a conversation that I am also writing about in one of my work, and I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, can we have Dr. Konoye, please?
Yeah. So I just want to make a comment about the complexity of the migrant status and the precarity associated with the status. In the first place, I know that it's not all migrants who have the same experience. Some are more privileged than others. And also, if you think about a migrant in relation to your concept of a home, it really introduces another layer of complexity because the home is not a fixed concept. And in fact, there are so many migrants who are very liminal. They don't really belong home. What you call home is not where they really belong. A case in point is the situation of Chidinma Adesina in South Africa. The South Africans would not accept her as a South African. At the same time, one questions to what extent she's a Nigerian. And given this precarity, I've seen that a number of us sort of strategically essentialize what Africanness is, or what Yoruba music, or whatever source we're referencing, or what it is. And I found that, there is that, very multi-layered experience of what migration or performance, or the performance of the migrant status is. So I don't know if you would like to speak to this complexity as it relates to your work, because for instance, you cited Chineke Orchestra, but the convener of this orchestra, in my opinion, is not even really Nigerian. Whereas we have first generation migrants who would adopt a different strategy, possibly due to their precarity. I don't know if you want to speak to this complexity. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, this is an ongoing research, and I like the what you post about the concept of home. And of course, when I presented, I was saying home here, I mean Africa, and of course, these migrants do not necessarily have to accept homeness as Africa. They could. Home is very, very wide concept anyway. But what I'm saying here from my own work, especially in terms of Àkójọpọ, was I remember when Àkójọpọ started, I met with the founder. I think he presented yesterday, Daniel, and we had our conversations, and it was like, I've never heard of, like, I found a book in the library, and it's Akin Euba's book, and who is Akin Euba? That was 2019. That who is this guy and what does he do? And I mean, a well-trained double bass player who was born in Nigeria but migrated to the US. And then that was how the conversation of, it led to some of the contribution of how Àkójọpọ started, because he was aware of, oh, I can play Shostakovich, I can play Bottesini, double bass, but I can't even play anything from home, like Africa. And he was interested, and I think, like I said, consciously or unconsciously, he began to get interested in what home is. And that's, I think, this homeness, as I see it, it could be a conscious or unconscious relation, like Chineke Orchestra may not perform any work of Fela Showande or any African composer, but and that might in turn not make them maybe an African-based orchestra. But if they start performing and creating a space for African art music, I think unconsciously they have already created a space for homeness, and homeness in terms of sound and in terms of memory. It doesn't have to be in terms of geographical boundary. It doesn't have geographical boundaries, and that's what I'm thinking. But I think I like what you said on the complexity of home. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point, thank you so much, Seyi. That was a great presentation, and thanks for your presentation. We look forward to your work and to more engagement. Of course, we can always engage outside at tea break, exchange of emails, phone calls, so people can follow up with Seyi's work. Thank you so much. Can we give you a round of applause, please? Okay.